looking around, I'm not sure how many of you are going to remember Tony Hancock. But for those who do, there's one episode of his Hancock's Half Hour on the radio called Sunday Afternoon at Home. It starts not with words, but with a lot of sighing. And then eventually Tony asks Sid James what the time is. 2:00 comes the answer. Some more sighing, some more mumbling, and again Tony asks the time. It's 1 minute past 2, comes the response. I do hate Sundays, Tony says. Every Sunday's the same. Nothing to do, nowhere to go. Is this what observing the Sabbath is all about? Boredom, nowhere to go, nothing to do. As you probably spotted, both the readings this morning teach us about the Sabbath. Deuteronomy gives us an account from the 10 Commandments to keep the Sabbath holy, whilst in the Gospel reading, we and the Pharisees are forced to question what this commandment really means. In Deuteronomy, we're given considerable detail about what this commandment says and how to apply it. Unlike some of the commandments, which are only a few words long, thou shalt not kill, for example, thou shalt not steal, only 4 words each, this commandment tells us that this day without labour is for all, for our families, for our servants, for our animals. For those of you who've got a donkey or an ox, you're not to work it on the Sabbath. For foreigners or aliens in some translations, i.e. those who are not Jewish in the context of the 10 Commandments. And this is to show that the Jewish people are different and that they value what God has done in their lives. The reading even mentions Exodus from slavery in Egypt. This day is a day when we are to remember what God has done, what God does, and what God will do in our lives. Though I hesitate to use it for being such a trivial example, it does remind me of the importance of sending a thank you note for a birthday gift, a way of us telling the sender that what they have done is valued and is appreciated. The Sabbath is one of the ways in which we can thank God for all he does in our lives. But then we have this rather interesting incident in Mark's Gospel. Now, perhaps you've been out walking, possibly even on the Sabbath, and you've noticed some ripe blackberries, and so you pick a few and pop them in your mouth. You might do it without thinking, except perhaps to make sure that you select some that are well above dog height. You might enjoy them for a moment and then move on. A small interlude before you continue your walk. No big deal. I wonder whether the same happened to the disciples, almost absent-mindedly plucking some corn as they walked through the field. In Mark's Gospel, we're not told why they did this, or even if they ate these ears of corn that they plucked. In the other 2 accounts of the incident, we have a little more detail. In Matthew, we're told that the disciples were hungry, perhaps suggesting a motive, whilst in Luke, we find that they rubbed the corn, presumably to remove the husks from it, and then that they ate them. But surely no big deal. But it is. They've been seen by the Pharisees, people who believe in a very, very strict observance and application of the law of Moses, the law of the 10 Commandments, and the other 613 commandments we find in the Pentateuch. And this happened to be the Sabbath. You're not to do any work on the day of rest. Now, brief aside, you may be sitting there thinking, they picked corn in someone else's field. Surely they've stolen. That's theft. Isn't that the issue here? That they have stolen from someone else and so broken the commandment, thou shalt not steal. However, and I'm sure you all know this already, Deuteronomy 23:25 helps you if this is the case. If you're walking through a cornfield and you pick a couple of grains of corn, because that verse of Deuteronomy says, if you enter your neighbour's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to their standing grain. Don't take a sickle with you when you're out on a Sunday walk. Or indeed you might remember the story in Ruth, where the poor are allowed to collect the gleanings, the corn, the grain that's left behind as the harvesters pass by. No, the plucking of the ears of corn is not the issue here. It's the day on which the disciples have done it. To be helpful, and I've typed helpful in bold and with inverted commas round it for reasons that I hope will become clear, but to be helpful, a list of activities forbidden on the Sabbath had been produced. There were 39 of them. And number 3 is reaping. You're not to do any reaping on the Sabbath. So the Pharisees had got Jesus and his disciples, his followers. They had broken the law. Clearly they were not good law-abiding Jews. And as we hear at the end of the gospel passage this morning, they plot to have Jesus killed. Though interestingly, in so doing, they've conveniently forgotten that to the Pharisees, the Herodians are also not keeping the law. But they can help get rid of Jesus, so it seems that they're happy to overlook that fact. Not surprisingly, that on numerous occasions, Jesus calls the Pharisees hypocrites. Now, another aside for you, because I got a little bit distracted by this. I was worried about this reaping. And so I looked it up, and technically reaping means harvesting. And indeed Webster's dictionary describes it as to cut with a sickle, scythe or reaping machine. Plucking a few grains does not constitute reaping. But the Pharisees were looking to catch out Jesus and his followers, so even though they believed in a very strict observance of the law, they now bent it to suit their own argument. Again, I expect you join with me in understanding why Jesus called them hypocrites. So how does Jesus respond to this accusation? He reminds those present of the time when David, the greatest king of the Jewish people, when he and his followers were hungry and they ate the bread of the presence, the consecrated bread or showbread in the temple. Bread that once it's been consecrated is only allowed to be eaten by the priests. If you want to know where you can find out that this bread is only to be eaten by the priests, Leviticus 24 will help you. Or in the second incident, he challenges those in the synagogue whether it is lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil. And we note that those he asks remain silent, because they knew that it would be wrong not to help someone in need, but their very helpful set of rules meant that to do so risked doing work, and so breaking the rules of the Sabbath. So has Jesus come to replace the law? Has Jesus come so that we no longer need to observe the Sabbath? Well, as Jesus himself tells us in Matthew's Gospel, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Indeed, repeatedly in Matthew's Gospel, we are given example after example after example of how Jesus has come to fulfill what is written in the law and in the prophets. Jesus hasn't come to tell us that we no longer need to observe the Sabbath. but he wants us to understand the reason behind it, its purpose. God gave us the Sabbath not to be an excuse to not help those in need. It was not to be a time so hidebound with rules that you needed to be an expert in the law to know what was and was not permitted. And rather mischievously, as I sat writing this, I began to wonder whether the Pharisees actually were doing their work when they mentally checked that list of forbidden activities so that they could then point the finger at Jesus. And so were they themselves breaking the Sabbath according to their own interpretation of the Sabbath? But no. As Jesus says, the Sabbath was given as a gift to us, a gift to mankind, and not that mankind was made for the benefit of the Sabbath. Now, I expect many of you remember the account in Matthew when the Pharisees ask him which is the greatest commandment. Of course, they weren't interested in knowing which was the greatest commandment. They were trying to trap him again and hoping that he would somehow break their rules about the law. But he happily answers them, and he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." All of the law and the prophets, everything hangs on these two commandments. Loving God and loving one another is the root of all that we should do. And if in applying the law we're not loving God and loving our neighbor, we're not doing it right. If we refuse to help someone with a shriveled hand because it's the Sabbath, not only are we not showing love to our neighbor, but we're not honoring God, because God wants us to show love to one another. But, and this is a very important but, this doesn't mean that we should carry on day in, day out doing the same thing, doing our normal activities or work. God has given us the Sabbath to remind us that we need to stop, to pause, to recharge. And in so doing, we are honouring God. And we should use this as an opportunity to remember and thank God, to offer praises and worship, to remind ourselves that at the core of our faith, a loving relationship with God and a loving relationship with one another, and that is so important to us that we want to offer our thanks to God. And just as if we're in love with a fellow human, we want to and we enjoy spending time with them, our love for God means that we want to and we enjoy spending time with him. The Sabbath is a time for us to remember this, a regular time in the rhythm of our lives when we pause the ordinary daily activities to spend some time renewing and refreshing our relationship with God, with those around us, and also with ourselves. Not a rigorous and difficult set of rules and constraints to which we must adhere. After all, you don't spend time with those you love because a set of rules say you must. You do it because you want to, because you love them. Now, you may have noticed that throughout, other than at the beginning when I was talking about Tony Hancock, generally I've used the term Sabbath rather than Sunday. And this has been intentional, not just because to that first Jewish audience that heard Jesus' teaching, the Sabbath was not on Sunday, but also because the nature of our world today means that some people need to work on Sundays. Medical personnel or transport workers or even those who are leading services in church. And so for some, their Sabbath might be a day other than Sunday. Yes, for many of us, Sunday is the best day for us to renew our relationship with God and to come and meet together here in church, and for us to renew our love with each other and for ourselves. But for those for whom it's not possible on a Sunday, what is important is that they do have time to do this as part of their weekly rhythm of life. But not because it's a rule written down thousands of years ago, but because it's a good, healthy way to live. And unlike Tony Hancock, who found his Sabbath, his Sunday afternoon, to be a burden and a drag, we should use this time to be refreshed mentally, physically, and, of course, spiritually. How we do this can vary. For some, it might involve activities in nature, such as a long walk, marveling at creation. Others may enjoy working in the garden. For some, it may be a time of quiet solitude or reading a book. But whatever works best for you, remember that it may be different for others. Because after all is perspective. Digging in hard ground is a lot more relaxing to a worm than going fishing. And get your notebooks out ready to take copious notes of the notices, or just to sit back and listen, because you know them all already because you've read the update. But just as a reminder, Sparklers is starting again tomorrow, 10 till 11:30 here in church. There'll be coffee and cake and biscuits and all sorts. And because it's an inset day, if older brothers and sisters are not in school, they are very welcome to come along as well. You may have noticed in the update there's a general election happening. I don't know, you may not have heard about it elsewhere, but we do like to give you cutting-edge news here in church. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, of course, I wouldn't dream of doing that, but what I am going to do is remind you the importance of making sure you are registered to vote, because if you're not, you can't vote, and also that you have photo ID. You apparently can even use an out-of-date passport. I'm just looking to check if anyone... Yes, that's what I've heard. But it does have to have your photograph on it. If you don't have photo ID, do speak to Nadine or me or to Sally, because we are going to be offering assistance to people in pointing in the right direction to get that sorted, because we want to make sure everyone who wants to vote has the opportunity to do so. There is also going to be a hustings here in church, where there'll be a chance for questions to be put to the various candidates for our constituency. There will be more details of that in the coming weeks. It's not for another few weeks, but if you have got a question you want to ask, do start thinking about that. We do need some help. I know it doesn't mean that we're always up here asking for help, but we do need some help, and that is, we're looking for someone who's able to help as a bookkeeper for the church, someone who's able to help with doing the banking and helping with paying of the various bills and things. Apparently, it's been set up by the previous treasurer in such a wonderful way that it's really easy to use. And if it isn't easy to use, I know where he lives, so you can go and see him. But it's not a huge amount of work. You don't need to be an accountant, but if you have a sort of an understanding of numbers, that would obviously be helpful. Certainly if you can count up to 10, I think that probably is a requirement. But if you are able to help, please do have a word with Nadine or me, or indeed let Sally know. There is also something coming up 21st and 22nd of June. St Andrew's Bookshop in Great Missenden are going to be holding a literary festival. They've got all sorts of exciting Christian authors who are going to be attending events for that. If you are interested, there are details on the update. Have a word with Nadine, who knows all about it, and you can also find details on the St Andrew's website. But that looks like it could be a very exciting time. The summer is a time not only for sunshine, as we've noticed today, but also a time for wonderful music. And there is loads going on here in church over the coming weeks. We've got Sing Joyfully coming up. That is 6th, 13th and 20th of June. We've got Wendover Singers on the 22nd and 23rd of June. And we've also got at St Michael's, we've got music in quiet places, the first one of which is going to be on the 22nd of June. So lots of opportunities for you to find out and to come and enjoy some wonderful music. If you'd like more details, again, it is on the update, or otherwise have a word with me afterwards and I can give you the details. The next church walk will be on the 30th of June, walking around Holton, approximately 5 miles, with no stiles, apparently. Obviously written by someone with a poetic bent. If you want more details about that, have a word with Michael, who will be able to give you details. And I've just realised there's another music opportunity coming up. In July, Wendover Music will be holding a concert here on the 7th of July. I think that's probably enough for you. But if you've got any further queries, by all means catch me after church and I can go through them with you. But thank you very much.